All right. Well, again, I am excited to continue our conversation from last time. We come a week from our first piece of this conversation with different energy, different vibes, but as Chanel said offline, still lots of work to do.
Yeah, pretty excited here.
Yes, I love that. I love that. And so we're going to dive into our conversation or continue our conversation on ableism. And I wanted to just start there because I think that there are different ways that people maybe even would define or identify ableism. And I think it's important to just have a baseline for our conversation moving forward, because both of you were able to share some of your personal journeys and experiences, but I would really love for viewers and listeners to just get a personal perspective or, an individual assessment of that, just to guide the conversation. And with full disclosure and caveat that we are not asking anyone on this meeting to speak for anyone but themselves or their own personal experiences. Chanel, why don't we open with you, if that's all right, and just your thoughts and experiences with conscious and unconscious ableism.
Yeah, so when you said that, I was just thinking about how a lot of times growing up, that like I'd get approached by people, even like just random people on the streets, and it would be like, they'd like pray over me, or they'd be like, oh, you poor thing, or it's like the old people are like, I need to get me one of those, and it's like talking about my wheelchair or whatever. And it would always be kind of funny to me just because, I can sense that it's coming from the right place or from the heart, but it's completely ableist now that I think about it back. And just the assumption that I am at least 5 to 10 years younger than I actually was at the time of them like meeting me or whatever. So immediately, infantilizing me and just making me, appear much younger to them or whatever. Just like talking to me like I'm 5 when, I can probably give my whole medical history by mouth by like the age of like 8. So probably younger than that. The natural assumptions that many people have, especially when they see a wheelchair or a mobility device of any kind, just, trying to get out of that space where we automatically assume their intellectual difference instead of like just a physical disability, or just not even taking the time at all and just, having their own agenda about who they think that I am when they approach me versus, taking the time to be like, what's your name? Like literally like going from 0 to 100 like so fast. Like there's so many little things you can do before that would give you contextual clues. There's so many layers to it, and I feel like especially as I've entered the workforce, I'm seeing less of it, but I still understand that some of that is a privilege just because, I got into my job with them knowing that I'm not 5 and that, I am smart and that I do know a little bit about some things, just enough to get me by. So that system is kind of like starting to fizzle out for me, but still like when I go out in the day-to-day world, like it is a little bit different still.
Well, first, thanks for sharing, but I would argue you know more than enough to get by and have really been putting in the work to help elevate all of our understandings. And so for that, Chanel, I'm thankful to you. Me personally, I'm thankful to you, and to Jen as well. So same question. I would love for you to chime in, and if you want to react to anything that Chanel said, but from your perspective, Jennifer, thinking about conscious versus unconscious ableism, what has that manifested like in your path?
Well, really, for the deaf culture, it's pretty complicated and multi-layered as well. I've noticed that deaf people typically maybe don't identify as disabled. but we are disabled in our society. That is what society sees us, and we use the ADA. Um, but typically we don't like to be labeled as disabled. Some people don't identify like that. So the deaf community inside, it's kind of got an ableism issue initially. But like for myself, I'm comfortable with saying, yeah, I'm disabled. But it took me years, absolutely years, to get used to saying that label, that disability, because when I grew up, I am Latinx, and also, in our culture, it's with our family, it's very religious. My family growing up, and so being Latinx as well, with deaf culture as well as the Catholic Church, there were a lot of stigmatisms related to disabled people. If our family, maybe they thought God was punishing us for something by giving us a disabled child, and so the family kind of waved us off and didn't really want us to be involved. And so I was growing up, and my parents told me, you have to act like hearing people as much as possible. I could tell that they looked at me like I was able. I'm able to read lips. I could speak a little bit, but to be honestly, I prefer not to talk. It's just my preference. And I do wear hearing aids, and I've got other issues, I guess. And technically, I want to be I'm a hearing person as much as I am, but it's not really my choice. And I'm just trying to match society and what society wants. What they're refusing to accept is me. So, gosh, it's just kind of like, what's the point, I guess.
Wow. What I took away from both of your stories first is that the clash between explicit and implicit, and explicit, or conscious and unconscious, manifests in very different ways, but it still creates this space where, and I've talked about this on social justice and women's hockey in the series before, it creates this space of the clash between, like passing or, assimilating. All of those things are done on our behalf, right? So I might react a certain way around white people, not because that's who I am, but that's because that's what I feel is expected of me in that particular space. And so I think it behooves us to open ourselves up to other communities and at least meet halfway and say, what can I learn? What can I do differently? How can I use different language? Not necessarily for my benefit, certainly for my education, but so that there's someone else that can come to the space and feel less tired or taxed by having to think about what I'm thinking of them. And that's ultimately why having these kinds of conversations, I think, are extremely important, is so that there is work being done on all sides and not just from one group to another, or for one group's benefit over the other, which is a lot of times what we see, which is now why I want to get into diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Chanel, I know you've talked about, now you're working in that space. Jen, you've been very open about advocating for more inclusion in specifically the hockey space. But I wonder, is there actually a gold standard for diversity, equity, and inclusion? And so maybe, Jen, we'll start with you this time. Do you think there is a gold standard?
No. Honestly, yeah, quick answer, no, not at all.